and you're doing it cleverly and meaningfully above all. So designers, especially designers who come from print, like me, because I'm older, there's the temptation to do clever or cool stuff to show off your creativity. This is a really creative agency who do amazing things, but here they're trying to show off, and actually it just, and has a lot of animations, this page, which gets so entirely confusing, and at the end there's absolutely no reason. Maybe you've shown me that you are good with CSS and that you have imagination and that you know how to do transparencies, but really you've done nothing for me, and actually I get lost and I don't even go and look at your portfolio. They're a brilliant agency. It's not a judgment, but this is when you show off for other designers, but you do nothing for your users. So whenever I, as a designer, have the temptation of do something that looks super cool and creative, I have to like stop myself and go, no, is this, does it have a meaning? Does it have a use? And it's tempting because there's so much that you can do these days, you know, that looks cool, or the animations and so on. And especially designers who are new to the web, they just go for it. They just put as many moving things as possible, and it really should be avoided. So the main takeaway for web design is that with the principle of don't make them think in mind, you should avoid ambiguity or information overload in your UI. But this can be simply, without going to extremes like the example that we just saw, it could be simply make sure that your elements are always differentiated. Don't make a heading look like a button. Make sure that there's no possibility of double interpretation, because that could be very confusing. And that's simple. Without doing anything crazy like that, it's something that could happen to all of us. So make also things look interactive when they are, and don't make them look interactive when they're not. And usability tests are your friend. Now, I know that usability tests basically have so much to do with budget, because with projects at a lower end of the scale, often, or you know, freelance designers or often say, well, I don't have the budget for that, I can't run tests. But in that case, just use your friends, colleagues, you know, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, just to get someone who's never seen your project, look at it, because there's also a thing called proximity blindness. I know I suffer from it a lot. When you're too close to a project, you can't tell anymore. So you need to step back and get someone else in to have a look, so that you ask someone to use your website and make sure that each element of your UI actually makes sense. Simple, basic stuff, but important to remember. Now, first object on the top left is, you can clearly see a triangle there. Is the triangle drawn? No, it's implied. It's basically implied, but we can almost see we can see it basically. And the same occurs in every other shape. That's a sphere. Where's the sphere? It's not drawn in the slightest. Loch Ness Monster. I think that's a really fat worm around a pole, I think. But however, we can see it. You know, we can definitely see it. So even when we have only a partial vision of an object's contour, our brain is able to fill in the gaps. Why? Because our brain doesn't want to think very much. So we just fill in the gaps, even we complete the shape in our mind, even when we don't have the complete details. And this is a principle that's called reification, which comes from the Latin res, which means thing or object. So we see a complete representation even with limited visual information. And there's an interesting thing that's happening over here. What can you see in the object on the top left? Can you see anything else apart from the triangle and obviously the three sort of incomplete spheres? Circles, rather. Well, exactly. I would have been so disappointed. So that's multi-stability. Basically, it's an example of two Gestalt principles at play in the same image. That's also multi-stability, because you can see the triangle and the circle and the incomplete circles. You can also see Pac-Man. So that's, you know, an example. So, and this is an example of using reification in your UI. There's also another principle that we'll see more in, that builds upon this. So basically, we all know these are circles. We don't need the complete shape to see that. So the main takeaway for web design is that your users' minds can fill in the gaps, and you must actually let them fill in the gaps to avoid cognitive overload. So use white space as a design tool, not as a color, but as a concept, white space as a design tool. Now, here's a face that looks very different in each image. Now, I should say, if there's any accessibility expert here, that there is also a condition by means of which you can't recognize people's faces. It does exist, so it wouldn't apply in this case, obviously. But in general, we can all tell who this person is because he's a very famous Hollywood actor. So humans have the ability to recognize shapes, faces, objects, faces, regardless of natural or artificial variations, such as accessories, facial hair, signs of aging. We recognize, we have this ability. And this principle is called invariance. And basically, thanks to invariance, we are able to experience the world without constant confusion and the constant need to reassess a scene that keeps changing before our eyes. So invariance helps us to minimize our cognitive efforts when we interact with the world around us. So it helps us to not think again. Now, this is a typical example of the use of invariance in web design because it's a captcha, which is very bad for various reasons. I think they're the work of, spawn of the devil, but however, we see them all the time. So the main takeaway for web design from the principle of invariance is that for now, it's the edge that we have over bots, apparently, which is why it's used in captcha. So now, these are kind of basic underlying tenets of Gestalt. Now we're going to look at other principles that are more like the design principles, like that we actually physically apply to design. Again, it's my selection, and there are more, because there are some that coincide so precisely with design principles that I think there is obviously an overlap. But this is my selection. So isolating individual elements from a background is an ability that came very useful to our ancestors in the open field when they had to detect a predator and possibly, run to safety. So this principle is called, this ability rather, is called figure ground organization. So basically, it's the ability to focus on one part of a scene, filtering out whatever else isn't interesting for us. So the most important element in a scene appears as in front of everything else. So the lion is very small, but still it appears even kind of in the same similar color to the background, but we definitely perceive it as coming to the forefront. It's also, a lot of Gestalt principles are used in photography, obviously, and this is when you have an image with a very shallow depth of field, so the part in focus really jumps out. It's very trendy at the moment. There's lots of Instagram filters that do that. So this is an example of how you can use it. So here, in this case, there's a very busy image in the background, but because the form is white and it stands out so clearly, my user doesn't think. It's very clear when I get to this page what I'm meant to do. Well, the final goal has to be that I'm needed to fill in the form. Also because the try free is red, which clearly signals need for action. So I don't have to think to work out what I'm supposed to do on this page. So main takeaway for web design is to make sure that most important parts of your UI stand out clearly against the background. Again, it may seem obvious, but if you roam around the web, you'll see in how many cases that doesn't happen, and then you lose your users. You get them lost and you don't know what to do. Now we're looking at the so-called grouping laws that are particularly useful in web design. This first one is called the law of similarity. So the human eye has the tendency to group elements together when they share similar visual features, such as shape, size, and color. And in this case, you get similarity at play because obviously the blue arrow and the white arrow, we perceive them as pertaining to the same group, even though they're positioned separately. And we possibly even think that they have a different function as well. So it's a principle that we probably apply, even non-designers apply unconsciously to web designs. But it's very it's very important to always bear it in mind. So, for instance, here, because it's very useful because the law of similarity allows us to create groupings of elements that are very different from one another. And a typical example would be on a web page like this, where the design agency has to list all their clients. If they had given into the temptation of leaving all the logos in their original color and shape and sizes, because you can't change the shape, obviously, then we would have had the Ling effect. So visual overloads, too many colors jumping to our attention. So by using a simple device of giving them same size and same color, we immediately understand what they belong to the same group and what they're doing there. So instead of perceiving the whole first and then the details, we can see the opposite. Like this, we perceive the whole first and then the details. That's what we do. So again, we go back to the underlying principle, which is that we see the whole before we see the details. So main takeaway is that UI elements that perform a similar function or belong to the same group should always share one or more visual feature. Now, here's where we see how our brain naturally perceives objects that are close to one another in space as belonging to the same group. And this is called the principle of proximity. So very simply, the human eye groups together elements that are close to one another in space. Now, typical example is in a navigation bar. So you have the pages on the menu elements. The pages are on the right, so clearly they belong together, and the logo is on the left because obviously it's a completely different element that performs a different function. So interestingly, we can see the law of similarity at play here as well, actually, because I can see that the blog item has a different color. So that tells me that there's a change, that's something that's changed. And it tells me that that's the page, that's the current page, that's a page that's active at the moment and where I'm in. So that shows you that we have two principles of Gestalt here and how you can use a principle and the opposite of it to make things work. And this, again, obvious maybe, but that's something when I look at web pages around the web, especially now when you have websites that have a lot of information to convey, that's where they fail. Often they put things too close or too far, and it's especially too close because of having too many things to cram in the same sort of very restricted space. But that's something that, for instance, you can use with clients, because another thing that I always think about is that when we go to our clients, when clients have unreasonable requests, then you can always, if you have a good reason to give them, such as, no, you can't because your user would not tell the difference or things like that, it's always really, really good because you can explain why you make a certain choice, other than just say, oh, it looks rubbish, which is not, it's not helpful for anyone. So main takeaway is to make sure that elements that belong to a same group are placed in close proximity, and on the other hand, items that don't belong to the same group are placed distant enough. So here is where items that share the same clearly delineated region of space clearly belong to the same group, which is what you can do when you have limited space, for instance. So instead of cramming out everything together, if you have no other option, then delineate a region very clearly so you can make up for the lack of space. So here, even though the dots on the left are actually closer to one another, we perceive those ones that belong into a group because they're different colors, everything, but we put them in the same group because they're in the same frame. So that's how you do it. So this is called the law of common region. So we perceive items as groups when they share the same clearly delineated area. Again, really simple, but think what would happen in a Facebook post if they didn't use that. It would be an absolute mess. But here, because it's used in so many different areas that have different types of information, sometimes it's implied, like here there is no line because it would be too much, again, avoiding visual overload. But the areas of the post are all clearly delineated, so we make the path of the user as fast as possible and as clear as possible. make UI easy to use by placing groups of elements within the, say, clearly defined region of space. This is the main takeaway. Now, this lovely image definitely represents a panda bear. Again, the image isn't complete, but it's definitely, we can make up for the lack of information. So this is a bit like the principle of verification, but applied to some more complex shapes, and it's called closure. So again, our mind can fill in the gaps and supply the missing information for incomplete shapes. So obviously this is a very clear application in logo design, but it can be very useful in design of web pages as well, especially web pages that have a lot of complex information, such as newspapers, because you can see it here, you can see it, actually it's not clear at all here, you can't see it at all. So these categories here only have 2 lines. Can you see it? Probably not on the screen, but so it's an implied rectangle because but it's only got 2 sides delineated. So, but we can still tell that they're separate. And again, the same thing happens. The lines, there's no lines between the columns, and there's lines between the horizontal lines between the items, but they're not complete. If they were complete, again, visual overload, there's no need. And if you think about the web, I think sometimes I like the archive machine and to look at the web like ages ago. And I remember Yahoo layouts when we were all using like Yahoo in the 90s, full of lines. It was, everything was so, and it was definitely visual overload. So now we're taking away, and it's very, very important. And again, they're using Laura Common Region as well. They're also using figure ground organization, because this button stands out very, very clearly because it's black against white. So again, that's an application of various laws of Gestalt. So the main takeaway is that minimal designs can really help UI by avoiding visual overload. Let users fill in the gaps, because less can truly be more. So you can defend, if you like minimal design, you can really defend it with your clients with this. Now, the next one is the law of continuation. So the human eye is accustomed to marking out pathways and following them. So our eyes and brains love to follow lines and routes. We love to be told what to do because we don't want to think. So, and this applies both to actual lines, because also here you see the lines are not complete because they're dots, so they're not actually a complete line, but we still could see the direction, and we consider them as complete even though they're not. So this is principle of continuation. The eye perceives the path as a continuous flow, but not just, don't think of it only in terms of line, think of it in terms of flow. So this is something, knowing that the human eye loves to be led and loves to follow a path, create a flow in your designs, but so that you can take the user where you want them, because it's pretty reliable that if you put an arrow, people will follow the arrow, to whatever consequences. So, but I don't mean that it necessarily needs to be an arrow. It could be just a flowing path in your layouts. So keep them on track and lead them where you want them. Now here I'm giving a practical example of because also it's one of my pet hates at the same time. So here's the Google Maps. When you go on foot and you want directions, it comes out as a line made of dots, but we know it's continuous even though it's not actually, because it's made of dots. Now the problem with this UI, I don't know if anyone else has experienced it, but every single time it makes me swear, because the dots actually appear. I'm visual. Giving me the physical steps, go down this road and then doesn't work for me, because also I don't even know left or right. I just can't tell. So I need to see it on the map, and I can't, because the dots are actually on the street. So it covers the name of the street always, and I can't tell. So I'm standing there looking up, and I can't tell because I can see the name of the street, but I can't see it on the map. And I have to go back and look at the instructions, but then I'm like, wait, what stat was I in? Where am I? So it's such a fundamental UI problem, and I don't know why they haven't sorted it yet. Have you experienced it? Do you agree? It's just I don't understand why they don't think about it. It's even worse. And also, they made it better now because as you move along, the blue dots get grayed out. But you're a blue dot. Why am I not a yellow dot? I don't know. And in the car, it's just as it's still. No, they've made it better. It's an arrow now. But however, anyway, rant over. So basically, if there is one takeaway for web design from Gestalt psychology is that you just use it to a conscious approach to UI with Gestalt can really, really help. I hope that you've seen this. So it's a way to look at designs that you instinctively think this doesn't work or yes, this works, and then knowing why and how because you have a little bit more of an understanding of how the brain works. So then you can analyze why you're rejecting certain designs beyond the statistical considerations, because to me it's really, really important that when you make a design decision, it should never be based on personal preference. Never. I mean, yes, it can, but only if it's backed up by actual reasons why you do something. You can't just say, oh, you can't use red because I hate it. You can't say that. Or, and actually, you can definitely use it to explain to clients why the logo can be bigger, which is a typical thing. Big and red, that's what they want. But then you have the, tools at your disposal to really explain why and to really explain that your choices are founded on sound reasons. And basically you can tell them you're not going to sell. This is not, because what do our clients want to do? They want to sell whatever it is that they are selling, but the ultimate aim is for them to sell. So if they say, oh, I don't like this, you need to say, well, why? Do you have a good reason? If they can't come up with it, chances are that you will be able to. So if there's one takeaway is don't make them think. Again, with many thanks to Steve Krug for the Don't Make Me Think book. And this is kind of it for now. I'll just say, so I'd love for you, I'll just say that I have, there's a website called Design for Geeks, which, because it's what I do, is I talk about design to people who are not trained designers but who need to work with design. This is a website, and there's also a Facebook group which is Design for Geeks that I would love for you to join, because we talk about design issues all day long, and it's always with this kind of mental attitude in mind. I often do free webinars and talks, and it's a very young, it's only been like a month or two, but it's very active, and it would be great to have you on there. And then please, yes, if there are any questions or things that you like to talk about. None. I will share the slides. Let me just leave here, and I just upload them to. I'll upload the PDF to. Where can I let you know? Is there a Twitter account? I guess there's a Twitter account. Hashtag. Okay, I'll do that. If you're using this hashtag, I'll use the hashtag. Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
In-car site.
Yeah.
And take a look at the source.
Okay. Yes. Why? Have you taken it? It was. So what? Tell us. What happens in a source code? Is it? Fantastic. Yeah. I don't think he's changed it since 2006. I think it's just still the same. I don't know what system it uses, but. Oh my God.
I don't know if that's.
Seriously. That's very funny. But again, it seems to work for him. But that's why I always say Western, because he is he's I don't know if he's actually British, but he's of Chinese descent, and they have a completely different approach to visual organization and design. It works in a different way. So I think it's very important to consider that when we think about our users. And I have friends who are now working with a Chinese audience, and they have a very different set of considerations, and they're having to really shift their and really do user research in that case, because otherwise you might really make a mess of it. Okay. So I guess that's it. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good to go. Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for being here again to talk about design. So this talk comes from a sort of a general debate about design and design thinking and what design means, the difference between something that's designed and something that isn't designed, and who is a designer, and what a force for good design can be, and above all, what good design is. So, defining good design, what is it? It's sort of a generic kind of statement, good design. What does that mean? So first of all, we're talking about the web. This is what we're thinking about specifically here. So good design responds to your audience's needs. So it's tailored to attract and speak to your core audience. Good design also leads the visitor by the hand, and it gives them as little as possible to think about, which we were talking about earlier in the previous talk. Good design also shows your visitor that you are trustworthy, and because it shows that you've put careful consideration in what you do and what you present, and as such it instills trust. Then good design also simplifies complex information, and again helps your visitors to not think, or think as little as possible. And it communicates without explanations. So again, no need for much brain power being expended by those who come and visit your website. And then the most important bit of all is good design solves users' problems, because I think it's also helpful to not just kind of in a way contradicting what I've just said. We must concentrate on web design because that's what we do, but we shouldn't. The principles of good design are the same everywhere, and they apply to any kind of problem solving and situation. So having said all this, how can we achieve good design? Just how? How can we do that? It's very simple to say, oh, good design does all these things, but how do we get there? First of all, what design is not, is that good design is not achieved with the tools we use. So often you see design courses that say, you know, we'll teach you everything about Photoshop. It's like, that's not design, that's just a tool. And anything that you use to design is actually a tool. Design is much more than that, than the tools that you use. Above all, which is always my main thing to specify, is that good design is not about making things look pretty and trendy. Not at all. That, if anything, is called styling, but it comes at the very end. Good design is also not even, or not always, depending, but not always, about creativity. And above all, you don't need to be a visual artist to have creative imagination. When I work with developers who need to design, they often say, oh, well, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And I really take exception to that. First of all, because creativity isn't just visual, first of all. And then because they sort of confuse being a designer with styling or doing visual stuff. And that's not what I think design is. I think design is most of all solving problems. And if you're a developer, you're solving problems, therefore you're a designer, in my view. So design is also not an optional. It's not a luxury or an add-on. And in web design, this is particularly relevant at the moment because there are so many web builders. So the cheap end of the client spectrum will always think that, you know, they don't need to design anything because they can do it themselves with a page builder. And that's not what design is. So absolutely not a luxury or an add-on. Now, couldn't not, you know, have a talk about design thinking without a quote from Steve Jobs, who was a controversial character, in my opinion, but we have learned a thing or two about design from Apple. So he would say most people make the mistake of thinking that design is what it looks like. People think it's this veneer, that the designers are handed this box and told, make it look good. That's not what we think design is. It's not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. I mean, arguably, Apple products are incredibly well packaged, but I find myself keeping boxes of Apple products. I've still got my iPod box from 2006 because it just looks so pretty. So definitely it's also about that. But it would never have had the success that they've had if the product wasn't amazing. And it's a product that actually design-wise is straight. Translate observation into insights and insights into products and services that will improve lives. That's what he puts at the core of it. The core of it really is always asking why. So focusing on an overall goal rather than a specific problem. And I'll give you a practical example of something that may happen in web design. So a company manager, can come to your client, comes to you and says, we need to increase traffic by 50% to our website. So the traditional approach, a traditional way of looking at it could say, okay, great, okay, let's buy Google ads, let's buy Facebook ads. But if you start by asking why, if you put that first, then you may find out by asking why and carrying on asking why and going deeper and deeper and wider, then you can find out other things. Like, for instance, look at why do you need more traffic? Why do you want to increase it by 50%? And that you might say, well, we need 50% more sales. And then you go, well, why do you think that actually increasing traffic will improve that? Let's have a look at the website. I actually had this exact thing happen to me literally on Wednesday. The day before I came here, a client called me and said, we need to do Google Ads. And a future client. Someone I know. And I said, well, let me have a look at your website. And the website was terrible. It had no call to action. It had absolutely nothing to do for the customer to do when they get there. And this is a small travel agency that does something very specific, which is fantastic boutique walks on the Camino de Santiago, which is a hiking trail to a pilgrimage kind of to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Super easy to get them traffic, I think, because it's such a specific thing that they do. But I thought, no, I'm not going to do Google Ads for you. There's 0 points because you need to look, you have a different problem. And actually, you don't even know how many people come to you. So in the case of increasing the traffic, I said, no, make your current traffic convert. Improve the product so that the people who already come to the website buy it. Or each case has got its specific things, but saying it in a sort of more generic ways, it could be that you find out that there's no need to increase traffic, but there is a need to improve the product. It may be that the product that you're selling is not what your customer needs. It may be that people come to your website because they think they're getting pink trainers, but they want orange ones. So that's why it doesn't convert. And no amount of paid traffic is going to improve that. So asking why is the first thing, and the overall goal rather than a specific problem. So this is what the design thinking process looks like. It starts from empathize, then define, ideate, prototype, and test, and it's not linear. So you have to do this, but then you always go back onto yourself, because when you test, you might find that the define phase wasn't, needs refining, or the ideation wasn't good, or even the empathy wasn't enough. So it's never linear. And above all, another caveat, anything that you use as a guideline shouldn't be too prescriptive. It's a guideline, but it's a very good guideline, and the most important thing is the empathize thing. So this is what happens at the beginning of a project. I always tell my clients, by the time I actually get started on the website, I've done 50 or 60% of the work, or even more sometimes. That when you actually when you actually get started on a website, you've learned, already so much, you've done so much that it's already all mapped out, and it's not the heaviest part of the job. So design thinking is a human-centric process, and it starts with empathy, and it's the most important thing. So empathize with your users. And if out of the whole process, if you just did this, you would be halfway there. Because in my experience, especially smaller clients, I don't know the size of clients that you work with, but that's what they fail to do. They just think that their idea, what they think is good, is what needs to be done, and very often it simply isn't. So the first stage is to get an empathic understanding, and that will involve necessarily some form of user research. You need to research your user, and so you can set aside your own assumptions about the world and about the specific part of the world that the user inhabits, and you can gain insights into the users and their needs. So you need to really identify, sort of kind of almost become them, so that you can begin to design something that's custom for them. So you need to research their users, understand their problems, and become them. And it sounds very even daunting, maybe, because it feels like such a huge, how do you do it? But the reality is that there are so many tools that can be done. Now, I really don't know whether the majority of you work for yourselves, if the type of 3 community is more big agencies or smaller agencies or solopreneurs, I don't know. The problem with people who don't have, don't work for a big agency is usually that there's no time or no budget or, something like that. But there's always a form of user research that you can do, whatever the budget. If you have the budget, this is the part that in my opinion, can give you the most benefit from being properly researched. So that's why, for example, in the example that we were looking at earlier, so when you are looking to, the reason why we need the existing traffic to the website that wants more traffic, why doesn't it work? So find out who the current users are and why they're not converting, they're not buying what the website is selling. So the tools are field studies, personas, interviews, user maps. They're all the things the typical tools of UX design. Now, we're not going to go too deep into detail with that, but there are you can scale this up or down as much as necessary, but there's a lot that can be done. So then the second phase is define. So when you have all the results from your user research, you can start defining the problem. You just go, okay, no, they want orange trainers. That's pink trainers are not gonna, are not gonna do it. So you define a solution. You start thinking, how might we solve this problem? So you define the human-centered problem, and you base it on the users. So the way to do that is you define the new offer, what the new offer must be so that the conversions can increase. So, orange trainers. I'm keeping it really simple, obviously, but and a way of doing that is asking questions with the how might we approach, because the how might we approach, instead of saying how can we do this or how must we do it, which so kind of makes it feel more restricted. So, and kind of like an obligation, or there's a sense of urgency to that. So if you use the word might, it's a subtle nuance, but it just gives it sort of defers judgment. So it's kind of widens the range of possibilities when you define the problem. So once you've got that, then you come to the ideation phase. As a term, the term ideation when is particularly vilified, because there are people there is a school of thought that says that design thinking is all sort of Californian waffle, and they think that, especially the word ideation. I have to say that I don't particularly like made up words like that, but basically it's the creation phase. Is where you then think, okay, how do we solve the problem? We need to design an orange trainer, basically. That's where you do it. And it's the fun part, because it's where you start stimulating free thinking so that you can come up with solutions. And there are loads of exercises to do this. And they can be done, you can do them by yourself, or you can do them in a team, and you can do them with your clients. And often they encourage lateral thinking so that you look at alternative ways of tackling the problem that might be things that you hadn't thought about before. And really the best way to do that is to let your imagination run wild sometimes. I mean, the brainstorming sessions, for instance, I don't believe in particularly but that's a different sort of talk totally. But basically, with the ideate tools is where the fun starts really, and there are so many things that you can do. One of them is mind maps. You know, just mapping, literally sitting down with a huge sheet of paper, putting the problem in the middle, and then going in all direct. You know, branching out with a what, with a why, with a how, and sort of seeing what ideas you come up with. And this is something that can be done with clients as well, or it can be done with a team, or you can do it on your own. It really can be applied to any of these situations. And then when you have all the, you look at the results, and some of them will be absolute rubbish, and some of them will be worth looking into, and you identify those and you look at those better. Other tools are simply to take notes and keep a journal, because not that, I mean, if you are very digital, then you can, there's so many note-taking tools that you can use on your mobiles or on your computers. But I think that pen and paper is amazing still, and I think that people are going back to it, which I love. This, for instance, is an example of an exercise that you can do. You just have 30 circles, and you start filling them up. Literally, just doodle, just go do whatever you want with them. Again, maybe it's got nothing to do with the orange trainer that you need to design, but it will have started processes in your mind. I think that any way of creating a solution is valid. There is no way. Like, for instance, when I know that I have a problem to solve and I need to start the creative process for it, I like to put the seed in my head, research the hell out of it, do the empathy part first, and then I do this stuff, and then I leave it. And then it's sort of I have this seed in my head, and it will come out, and I don't exactly know when it will come out, which is why it's important to do all these things. So if you leave it for a little while, then by the time I sit down, I actually have to do something about it. It usually comes. It's never failed so far. I hope it never does, because otherwise there'd be a problem. But however, so you can up your game with clients, especially clients that have never been asked to do this by the people that create stuff for them. So make them participate, because really, with web design, when we need to find a solution, we need to find a solution for two tiers of people. First of all, the client, and then the client's users, basically, because it's two different things. And in my experience, what is often problematic is to get the client to understand that it's not about them, it's not about what they like, it's about what the users like. So if you make them participate and make them do all these things, it will shift their perception, and it actually will make them understand things that they never thought. And it will actually prove to them they can be creative as well. They can fill circles with fun stuff. It just opens up so many more possibilities. Then you get to the prototype phase, which is essential, especially in web design, when you start mapping out what needs to be done. So what is a prototype? Prototype is an experimental phase, and it's an initial basic solution to the problem that can be shared and tested. And in web design, whenever possible, it could be wireframes. I prefer, even when I do wireframes, I always prefer them to be interactive. I'd rather it were a really bare bone website, but it's already somehow interactive, or to use a tool that makes it interactive, because it makes it more real. But usually it's bare bones, because we go back to the designing versus styling. At this point, you don't really want that much style to be applied, because then it distracts the client. Again, these are things that are great to do when there's the budget and the time to do, but that's where you share and test, and you may go back to, you may think, okay, no, this doesn't solve the problem, because once you actually make it interactive, you realize that there's one step too many, and people don't get to do orange trainers fast enough, so that's where you go back. So the prototype tools are fairly obvious. It could be from a pencil and paper to wireframing tools. it really depends, and for me it depends on the project. Like, funnily enough, I don't really do sketching when I do websites. I much prefer doing it in a digital environment straight away, but it's as valid as anybody else's. We've all got our process in that sense, and again, as we were saying, it's not prescriptive. But even a wireframe on a piece of paper is a prototype. It's and then comes the testing, and the testing is arguably where you test properly. You get to know whether you have been empathic enough with your users, whether that solution does work for them or not. So you can test a solution, and you might reveal insights that will mean that you need to redefine the problem and learn more about users, or maybe you've been so great that it just works, it's all perfect, and full steam ahead, you can develop and style and do everything. So again, there are lots of cool testing tools. There's also websites where you can you pay people to be your users. Sometimes you will, of course, have users that are not your final user, but they're just simply people who are invited to test and see whether the website, they understand it, they understand how it works. So there's many ways you can test usability, and when you don't have, as we were saying earlier in the previous talk, when you don't have the budget for it, just get someone who's never seen your website to use it for you and see whether they understand it and whether it works. Like, really simple. So feedback is what you get in this case, and feedback is what allows you to make decisions. And that's one thing that I like with web design, because when in print, there's not that much testing that you can do. Once it's printed, it's done. But for instance, Apple are a company that used to, I don't know if they still do it, I doubt it sometimes, because they make design decisions that really are against my needs as a user, so they're losing me. But that's one of the reasons why the products are so expensive, apart from the fact that they can do it, and they just do it. But it's because they test the hell out of things. They just keep testing. They had tests so many times that then when they come up with it, it's good. Apart from they take out all the ports from my computer, and then I can't use it, and I won't buy the next one because it's not usable anymore for me. So basically, design thinking is a journey of many discoveries with many steps backwards as well as forwards, which is what I like about it. In that sense, it's not prescriptive. For me, what I take from it is, and in a way, when I found out that it was a thing and it's been, it's been sort of ratified and there's a course at Stanford, I've always used this kind of process in one way or another. But again, as we were saying earlier in a talk with Gestalt, doing it consciously as a process allows you to be more specific about it also, and it allows you to go to your clients and say, look, no, it takes this long. If you're in a hurry to see your website, you shouldn't be, because if we do it this way, ultimately you will end up with a website that really responds to your users' needs. So you will have inevitably better UX, because this is a UX process basically, and it will sell more. It's inevitable, basically. That's what the final result is. So there are endless benefits to design thinking, and here's a list, because it means that instead of sort of the final build happens when you know so much about it that there's much less risk of going back and having to undo everything. So it's human-centered, so it makes your users love you because you make them the focus of attention, and we all love that. We love to be the focus of attention. So then it minimizes uncertainties and risks by considering a wide range of potential solutions. That's how you minimize risk. Then it's solution-focused. It's not aesthetics focused, it's solution focused. And so with the prototyping and the testing, you know that the product hits the mark, which results in better user experience, because again, the solution is based on the user. And an inevitable byproduct is, again, better sales. So the point is that anyone can be a design thinker. This, I think, proves, if you adopt this process, you are basically a designer. So anyone who devises solutions to problems is a designer. Anyone can be a design thinker. And I don't care what type of designing you do. You could even be, you know, a mother that finds a good solution to the child who doesn't want to eat. You may use a design thinking approach to that. You just empathize, you put yourself in their shoes. Why don't you want to eat carrots? And you suddenly find out that actually they hate the color orange. So, you know, you find it's finding a solution by empathizing. So I'm not, when people say, you know, solopreneurs, you know, freelancers say, oh, I can't do all this because, you know, my clients, they never had the budget. But you can, so an abbreviated version would be to just use a questionnaire with your clients and make sure that they fill it and make sure that you give them feedback on that and that you analyze what you find from them. So it can be used at any level. Now, a few examples of design thinking. So from the early days of Airbnb, another company that started in a way kind of ended up in another, but I won't open a discussion on that. However, what they did at the beginning, they realized that they weren't getting the sales that they were expecting in New York, which is where they got started. So even though they're a Bay Area company. So they looked at the listings and they realized that the photos were rubbish. They were really, really bad. So they went to New York, flew to New York, hired a photographer and started taking great photos. And their sales went boom, way up. And they started doing that everywhere. So when I was living in London, I was renting out my spare room all the time with Airbnb. My God, you know, it was fantastic. And they sent a photographer, which was brilliant because it was also a way of checking that the place was safe, that it was as advertised. Unfortunately, they don't do it anymore, but you know, it was a great way. And it was a way of using design thinking because they empathized with the users. They asked the guests and they asked the hosts. And the host said, well, all I have is a mobile phone. I can't take good photos. That's not what I do in life. And the guests said, it looks, I don't want to stay there because it looks terrible. So that's a case in which design is also form. And I won't open the debate about form follows function because that's at the beginning I've read. I haven't actually been on it. Difficult to carry things up it. And elderly people can't use it. And it freezes in the winter and you can't use it because it's super, super slippery. So it fails on every step of the way. And the City of Sciences in Arts and Science in Valencia is very similar. The point about, and I'm angry about the fact that I'm a skater. I skate, I inline skate, and there's there's many skateboarders in Valencia as well. Oh my God, what a fantastic playground it would have been because it's very big and everything is cobbled. It's impossible for any wheels. You just can't use it. So the result is that it's visited by tourists, but it's not visited very much by the population. Plus, it's all covered in beautiful, uneven ceramic tiles, kind of the Gaudi style, which means the maintenance is a nightmare and it's super, super expensive. So bad design thinking, zero empathy with the users. In the case of Valencia, it's so breathtaking and it's so big that actually I kind of forgive it. I can't help forgiving it because it just gives me such thrills of delight to see this beauty, you know, the incredible beauty of it. It's actually, if anyone is a Doctor Who fan, it features in one of the last episodes last year in 2017. So bad design thinking, not applied to web design, but very bad. Now, very good design thinking. So this is an MRI scan machine for children. So an engineer observed that children were kicking and screaming or terrified, you know, absolutely like frozen in terror at the idea of entering an MRI scan machine. I mean, I think it's scary enough for adults, really. So what he did was like, well, let's make it fun. So basically I think this is Mr. Happy, the Mr. Happy cartoons. So that's what it was transformed into. And now children are delighted. And you make a play, you know, they basically say, oh, you know, you can't move because otherwise you'll... Mr. Happy is sleeping, so if you move if you move in it while you're in it, you will wake him up. So it's all a game, and instead of being terrified, they actually look forward to it, and they're really excited by it. So example of perfect design thinking at play. So it's obviously also good engineering, but it's and if you notice, the thing that comes first here is empathy. That's the one bit that you cannot miss, because you can miss any of the other bits, so you can mix them together and so on. But empathy, no empathy. Calatrava, no empathy. Apple at the beginning, no empathy. Empathy. This is what makes it work, and I think it could cover a sort of multitude of sins as well. So I that's the bit that I find super important, and that changes everything. So be a good design thinker. Anyone can be a design thinker. If you're a developer, you are solving problems, so you are a design thinker. You're someone who needs to design solutions, and you need to approach it from the point of view of the user. So just anyone can be a design thinker. If anyone can, so can you. Anyone can be a design thinker, and this is the process that you can use to that you can apply not just to your working life, but to other areas as well. Simply by using empathy. I dare say even by sort of apply empathy to human relationships. It's basic, which is why people sometimes say, oh, well, it's like, what's the expression? It's like when you discover something that's actually really, really obvious. Yes, it's true. This process has been used, a form of it has been in use since forever, but this simply structures it and gives you a framework. Like as with anything else, a framework is simply a guideline, an indication, and this is what it is. So I hope that it showed you an interesting process. I think that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Who told you ideation was a rubbish California?
Oh, there's
The question was, who is this on for the recording? Who told you that ideation is a rubbish California word?
There's it came up in a recent Facebook debate with friends who do design type things, and they were all up in arms against design thinking and the word ideation and things like that.
It's been in English for hundreds of years. It's not a
Good.
It's not a neologism.
I'm very glad to hear that. Good. Thank you. But yeah, basically there was a whole debate. It was interesting for me to see, because I thought, okay, I really want to see why you think it's rubbish. Tell me why you think this is all rubbish. And as with everything, I think it was a reaction, because IDEO are very, they do consider themselves gurus of design and so on. So it can get annoying, like everybody who's smug is a little bit annoying. So I think it was a reaction to that. But it was interesting for me to see, okay, actually, I'm not going to drop design thinking just because you think maybe it doesn't always work. There may be situations where it's not the best process, but then use something else. But as a process, I can't find flaw with it for what I do. What do you think? Can anyone see an objection to it, or? I take it as a no.
You showed us the 5 phases with empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And what's the difference between define and ideate? Because they both seem similar, because you come up with a new solution for the problem.
No, in that case, that means I didn't explain it well, because in define, you actually define a problem. You don't, when you empathize, that's where you start finding the problem, because you realize that maybe there's a different problem to the one you thought. And then when you define it, then you actually do find the definition of the problem. When you ideate, you find the solution. You look at finding the solution. So for instance, I think there was an example of a pump that had been designed to help for villages in Africa to make it easier to get water from a well, something like that. Sorry if I can't be any more specific. And the solution that had been found didn't work, and they couldn't work out why it didn't work, because it was a functional solution. Then by empathizing, they realized that actually the users were mainly women, and this pump forced them to make movements with their hips that they were embarrassed to make. So that's why even because it made them look. But I'm afraid that women have a range of problems that are very real, and if it made them look vulgar, basically. So they didn't want to use the pump. So by empathizing, they found that the solution wasn't actually a good solution. So they needed to work out. So that's when you empathize, you find the problem. When you define, you say, okay, this is what the problem is. You define it, and then with the ideation, you look at creating an imaginative solution.
Thank you very much.
In the prototype phase, the testing is really important, right? So practically, what are the ways? I mean, how can we test it? And the user testing, you said, right?
Yes. So depending on budget, if you are a big agency that has a big budget, then you would actually have the means to run expensive surveys and test and do the testing like that. The tools that I mentioned for testing a website, unfortunately, I didn't make a note of it, which was silly because then I can't remember. But there are actually tools that are expensive, but they're websites or pieces of software that will get real people to test your website. Then, like I said, failing all that, if you don't have the budget, if you don't have the time to run the surveys, or just get anyone that has never seen your site, even if they're not your final client. Seriously, anyone. Even if they're not your final user, but better than just you. Yeah.
Exactly my idea. I think. Thank you. Just let anyone use the website and try to make them explain to you what the product is that they are using.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if they can't tell you, then it's probably bad design, or the message is not clear.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's it. In fact, someone who isn't a client sometimes can be more useful because they don't know you or the product or anything, so they're in a better position to actually tell you whether it works or not. Exactly. Well, for instance, I've worked in a big cultural institution, the British Film Institute, where they had a new logo that was designed before I got there, and it was a terrible, terrible logo because it couldn't be used. It was only pixel. There was no possibility of having a vector version. The guidelines were crazy, and they hadn't. And the whole the staff, and we're talking about the whole of the BFI was like 1,000 people, absolutely hated it because no one had asked the staff one single question about the logo at the design phase. So they felt completely not invested, and they felt like bypassed, and that the institute, because it's a film institution, and people who work in film are very, very attached to what they do. It was very important that they should have been involved. They weren't, and the logo was a disaster, and they still have it, and it still is a disaster because there was no empathy in the process. Thank you. You get very silent when no one talks. You get very silent. I guess that's all. Thank you very much. Now I just want to say thank you. There's a website at the moment. So at the moment, it's just it's actually is currently a sales page, but that's where I do bookmark it if you're interested in these things, because I publish this stuff there. And then also, as I said earlier, there's a Facebook group which is Design for Geeks, which is where all these things get discussed as well. So if you want to join, I'd be delighted to have you in the community. So thank you very much. Thank you.